Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. There was a little primary that happened across the country last night. Maybe some of you saw it. Of course, I'm joking. There were some major races and upsets. That's really going to help determine what the landscape for the election cycle looks like as we move into the fall. But what happens specifically when one of the few Republicans willing to publicly break with President Donald Trump gets targeted and millions of dollars flood into a primary race to remove him? We're going to be discussing that today. We're going to be unpacking the stunning defeat of Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie, a 7-term incumbent who built a reputation as an independent conservative, but increasingly found himself at odds with President Trump and influential political donors. The race became the most expensive House primary in the United States history, with more than $32 million spent on a single race, you guys, including over $9 million from pro-Israeli groups and millions more from Trump-backed super PACs. So Trump's allies, they framed the election as something bigger than one congressional seat, a test of whether dissent still has a place inside the Republican Party. But I think there's a whole other level to discuss about this story. Massie has also been among the loudest and one of the lone Republican voices pushing for greater transparency around the Jeffrey Epstein files, repeatedly questioning what powerful interests may still be protected and calling for more disclosure. So, was this simply just a battle over loyalty to Trump, foreign policy, and Republican priorities? Or what happens when a lawmaker consistently challenges powerful institutions and entrenched networks? Civil rights attorney Eric Fudali, who represents 11 survivors connected to the trafficking network of Jeffrey Epstein, is here to help me break this all down, from the money, the messaging, and really the bigger question underneath it all. In modern American politics, how much independence can elected officials actually have in a system that moves to discipline them? Eric, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here as always.
Yeah, it's always funny because every time I'm like, oh, I want to have you on to talk about something else happens, and I feel like we're always doing this dance where we're in a consistent cycle of breaking news. But this story just seemed too big not to have you unpack it with us. What were your initial thoughts before we get into the nitty-gritty of the unseating of Thomas Massie?
Right. So, believe it or not, I don't typically spend a lot of time or energy into Republican primaries. That is not something I am very interested in at all for the most part. But obviously, this one, given Thomas Massie's role in the Epstein files and his pretty robust efforts to get the Epstein Transparency Act filed, he's been pretty much, him and Ro Khanna have been the loudest voices when it comes to transparency, accountability as it relates to the Epstein files. So I did take an interest, and I also saw, of course, how much money was being spent to unseat him. And unfortunately, I'm not surprised by any of this. This is sort of could have been expected, I suppose. It's been pretty clear for, at least to me, for at least over a decade, that anyone who goes against Donald Trump will face the ire or will face the wrath of Donald Trump. And this is no different. What's so shocking to me, or at least what's so troubling to me, is the position that he took against Donald Trump. For me, was a pretty bipartisan issue until Trump flipped him. That's what's so baffling and so frustrating about this thing. And I'd like everyone to remember, back in 2024, during election time, Donald Trump campaigned on releasing the Epstein files. That was one of the tenets of his campaign. He was asked point blank in an interview whether he would support the release of the Epstein files, and he said very clearly, yes, he would. His party really ran with that. You had Pam Bondi bragging about them being on the documents being on her desk. You had his weird, nerdy influencers holding up binders saying, we have the Epstein files. We're gonna look at them. We're release. I mean, that was part of his campaign. He seems to be the only one that changed his mind on that issue, and that, of course, the MAGA, the MAGA Republicans just sort of followed him in that 180, as they so often do. And the ones that didn't are now pretty much excommunicated from the party. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I probably disagree with on 99.9% of all issues, took a strong stance on the Epstein files, and she's no longer even with the party. She's been, harshly criticized by Donald Trump and his allies. And it seems like now most Republicans that I spoke pretend that she was ever part of the Republican Party. Like, oh, she was always crazy, right? Even though she was a very popular Republican. And now Thomas Massie, who again was a very, I think you said 7 terms.
Mhm.
Really, his biggest crime appears to be advocacy for the Epstein files, or advocacy for the release of the Epstein files. And it gets deeper, of course, with Israel and AIPAC, which I obviously I'm not here to discuss. But as it relates to the Epstein files, that was he was a very big voice. He got the Epstein Transparency Act passed, and he's being punished for it, and he's no longer in Congress because of it. So, from a victim's advocate perspective, not a political expert, a political commentator's perspective, it's troubling to see that taking such a common sense stance for accountability, transparency against the biggest predator in the history of our time is being punished by his own party for that.
What I find interesting too in all of this, and thank you for all of those enlightening points you made, is the fact that, Donald Trump, we know he says whatever he wants in the moment, and then he flips and people in his tribe will just follow him blindly. But I do think it is interesting that no one really is calling it out other than you and some other people that I've, seen in the news, and it's far and few between, around the fact that this man, President Trump, is in the Epstein files thousands of times. So do you think part of this is this sort of retaliatory effort to block the public from perhaps knowing the depth of his connections to these files?
I think you'd have to be lying to yourself to come up with any other conclusion, really. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about, who really is running the Department of Justice. Right now, the person who is actually running the Department of Justice was Donald Trump's former attorney, right? I mean, it's just the conflicts are just so baffling and so out in the open that it's hard to even sort of try to really have a nuanced or intelligent conversation about corruption or separation of powers and that sort of thing. Like, we're so beyond that it's really even difficult, or really even not really no point into trying to have like a real debate or conversation about that. Donald Trump is running this Department of Justice. Donald Trump is running every single aspect of the Republican Party, every single Republican congressman, every single Republican senator, every single really branch of the government. Those that turn against him are really just excommunicated from the party. So what I think this shows, as if there was any doubt before, but maybe this gives even the largest confirmation that we've had, that like Donald Trump was very adamantly opposed to the release of the Epstein files. He went through great efforts to keep them private. He continues to go through great efforts to keep them private. His Department of Justice continues to go through great efforts to keep them private. And I think this is sort of the icing on the cake to prove that this was a big issue from Trump, that he has worked really hard behind the scenes for this cover-up, that his Department of Justice is engrossed in a cover-up, and that Thomas Massie, someone who went against the grain there and was an advocate for transparency, is now no longer a part of Congress, or no longer part of government. So yeah, I think this is really good evidence. Not that any reasonable human being needed any more evidence.
Right.
That Donald Trump has been behind this cover up and will continue to be.
When we're looking at this from a survivor's perspective and the work that you do in the legal representation in that space, it's hard not to feel incredibly cynical, Eric, around what's going on, because you see this incredible amount of money, the most money ever spent on a race. You see the person that is ousted was connected to wanting transparency around these files. What do you then say to the people you're representing about this justice system, about the legal entanglements that our government has in this moment, and how it relates to what they have gone through? I mean, that's got to be two very hard things to hold in your position.
It's a really great question. It's a really good question, Ellie. It's important to remember how long and for the decades in which the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, have been wronged and have been on the wrong side of law enforcement and the Department of Justice. I've said this many times. I'll continue to say it, going back all the way to the 90s, when Maria Farmer made a very credible allegation to the FBI that was basically summarily ignored. Fast forward to 2008, when Alex Acosta caught Jeffrey Epstein in his tracks, gave him a sweetheart deal under very suspicious and shady at best circumstances, once again depriving the victims of justice. Epstein then had another about decade worth of abuse after that Alex Acosta deal, wasted no time, was abusing one of my clients while still wearing an ankle monitor. As it related to that punishment. Then, of course, Jeffrey Epstein's finally arrested behind bars, and he is miraculously, suspiciously, shadily again allowed to kill himself. Fast forward to Ghislaine Maxwell, the only person to ever receive any type of justice as it relates to Jeffrey Epstein. She's then transported to a minimum security resort style prison where she's reportedly playing with puppies. And now Donald Trump is considering, apparently a pardon for her. So the victims have been wronged every step of the way. And what I've been so impressed with, what I've been screaming from the mountaintops for people to understand is like, despite all of that, despite all of the disregard, the wronging from the Department of Justice, the failures of the justice system and law enforcement, they continue to fight and they continue to be really loud and have their voices heard and their voices echoed. And what was so remarkable at this last, I would say, year or so in the Epstein saga, if you will, is that they got real movement and real change and real progress as a result of their voices because certain lawmakers latched on to these, and I mean that complimentary, like latched on to this movement and latched on to the voices and amplified the voices of these Epstein victims. And that, of course, was Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie were two of the primary. Now, I don't know their motivations for such, and frankly, I don't really care what their motivations were. They were doing the right thing, regardless if it was for political fodder or what. They were amplifying the voices of these victims. And again, while I disagree about almost everything else that Thomas Massie has ever said or done in his political career, this was not one of them. So what this says to the victims, for me, is that the message to the victims, and I don't think it's true, but I think the message to the victims, and it wouldn't surprise me if this was part of the point of all this for the Trump administration, was the message to these victims is that no matter how hard you yell, no matter how loud you are, no matter how much grassroots support, no matter how much congressional support you have, I, Donald Trump, still have the ability to stop this in its tracks. And here's another example of it. And I think that's what's so scary to me. And that is what's so debilitating to the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein is they've made such progress. They've gotten these Epstein files released. If you asked me a year ago, will these Epstein files ever be released? I probably would have said probably not. The cynic in me would probably say no. Donald Trump is too powerful. His party, adheres to his wishes too strongly. But they fought and fought and fought, and they got real change and real progress. And now it looks like, Thomas Massie is almost the martyr for that, if you will. And what scares me is the message that no matter how hard you fight, no matter how much support you get, we're going to tear down that support. And that is scary. And that is really unfortunate for these survivors who have fought so hard, no matter the consequences, no matter how long they've been failed.
I appreciate that. I want to take it out a little bit and broaden this because, the Supreme Court's campaign finance decisions are really a big part of this conversation, too. And I'm always trying to connect dots for people when we do these shows here at Facts Over Fear. And those decisions have dramatically changed the role of super PACs and outside groups. So are we now starting to see what a lot of people, myself included, was warning for years and years that could happen, these long-term consequences of allowing so much outside money, these super PACs being able to flood the zone, so to speak, financially start to impact our political system? And how does that play in when you are trying to seek justice within a space that there is so much injustice at play?
Yeah, so that's sort of a two-part answer. I mean, the first part is I think that's something we've seen since the Supreme Court made that ruling on Citizens United. I don't think that's anything that is new. I think this new example of Thomas Massie's defeat and the amount of money that was poured in against him as a result primarily of the Epstein files and his advocacy for the Epstein files, I think is a really important personification. I think it's an easy example for people to understand and see how it works. But this has been an issue for as long as that law has been in place. I think it's a terrible aspect of our democracy. I think it undermines democracy. And I think it allows for money to buy candidates, money to buy laws, money to buy power. And in this scenario, money to buy silence, money to buy lack of accountability, money to stop a criminal investigation, perhaps in its tracks, money to stop the support of survivors and victims of the most prolific predator of our time. I mean, I've been saying and screaming again from the mountaintops that Jeffrey Epstein's the only person I've ever seen get special treatment beyond the grave, especially the only criminal I've ever seen. Here's another example of it. I mean, here's another example of money being poured in to stop a person who was primarily supportive of Epstein associate accountability. So that's, I think, the answer to the first part of your question. The second part is from a survivor standpoint or from a survivor advocate standpoint, it shows to me that I think we just have to fight. It's not discouraging to me. I just think that we have to fight stronger. I think it's a good example of what we're up against. I, as a trial attorney, I exclusively represent victims. So I only represent victims. Typically, against very high profile people with a lot of wealth. That is basically what I do. It's sort of a David Goliath situation every day for me. And I think this is a very public example of what law firms like the Bloom firm, that I'm a managing attorney of support, and what we do every day. It is a lot of money is there to protect powerful predators, whether it is Jeffrey Epstein or it's some CEO or it's some director or movie producer or music producer or a modeling agent or a famous photographer or a famous rapper or actor or agent, wherever it is, or politician. If someone has power and money, it becomes very difficult to take them down. And that is something that I've prided myself, to do my entire career. And what my hope the message here is as we move forward is that this is just another sort of obstacle in the road to justice. This is not the end. Thomas Massie losing his seat is not going to stop the swell of support for Epstein accountability and Epstein transparency. It's not going to stop people like me, and it's certainly not going to stop people like my clients. What I do think it is, and I hope the message is the public is like, this is what we're up against every day. This is what victims face every day. This type of money, this type of silencing, this type of pressure, and this type of broad scope, I guess financial backing behind predators. This is what we face every day. And hopefully the public can sort of see now and maybe place themselves into the shoes of victims and what it must be like for them to stand up to someone famous. My clients are always receive online backlash, no matter who they accuse, whether it's Diddy, whether it's Eric Swalwell, whether it's Kanye, whether it's Bill Cosby, whether it's, insert name here, whether it's Jeffrey Epstein. There's always backlash and there's always an assumption that they're in it for the wrong reason. And like, this, I think, hopefully can be example, Natalie, to see like, this is what we're up against. This is the type of stuff we face every day. Money and power pouring in to support and back predators. It is not, it is an uphill climb, and use this to give you another reason to believe women, believe victims, support survivors, and give them the courage and amplify their voices, because that's what they deserve. And this is what they're up against.
Oh, thank you for that. I wanted to sort of dovetail because you really helped me lead into the next question I wanted to ask you, which is, where do we go from here? Because to your point, Massey's gone, but that's not going to stop this investigation. But I think the point of backing this other candidate was to maybe intimidate or try to slow progress or whatever. So when you look at this from the bigger picture, what is the next step? How do you continue to garner support for this issue amongst the Republicans? Because like you said, this is supposed to be a bipartisan issue around getting justice for these victims. And you're going to laugh at me, but I like to go where the people are. And the people right now are on Reddit. So I'm on Reddit right now and I'm reading a lot. And people were just saying that Republicans just don't care about the Epstein files. They don't care. They're going to follow Trump wherever it leads. And that is that. It's a pointless game to try to pull them in. Do you actually think that is true? Or what in your experience, are these issues just too big to ignore at a certain point?
I have a few answers to that. Unfortunately, I do agree that most Republicans these days will believe and will advocate for whatever Donald Trump tells them to advocate for. I don't really need to go into the many examples of things that Trump said before his campaign and flipped on, and that he still has the amount of support he did. So I do believe what you're seeing on Reddit. And I also enjoy Reddit. Great platform, great site. I try to avoid politics on there, and I'm usually reading
That's fair.
music and stuff. That's the where I clear my mind. But nevertheless, I do think Republicans, for the most part, aside from the ones that we already just spoke about, will just whatever Trump says, okay, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that the voices are going to. We've been facing that opposition basically almost the entire Trump presidency, right? That's important to remember. Trump has basically been opposed to releasing the Epstein files this entire process, right? All of this ground support, all of the raising of the voices of the survivors, all the fights, the rallies, the press conferences, the congressman getting behind this has all been during the period of time Trump was opposed to this. And look how much support and look how much progress we made. I really don't want it to be lost in here. And I continue to find people like this, getting these files released, even in the redacted nonsense sense they were, was a huge, Huge victory, survivors. Those files have been secret for administration after administration after administration, right? This is the first time they've ever actually been released. Now, there hasn't been a lot of accountability. There's been some social accountability. We've seen some accountability overseas. We've seen some people resign, that sort of thing. We haven't seen any real criminal accountability, but that was a huge, huge, monumental victory for the survivors. And that was during the time Donald Trump and his party was advocating against this. So what that shows is we don't need the Republican Party. We don't need the MAGA Republicans to agree with us that the Epstein files should be released, that there should be accountability. We just need to continue to fight, because fighting and raising the voices and amplifying the victims' voices got every single person in Congress, except for that one idiot from Louisiana, not to vote for it, right? It was unanimous in the Senate. It was almost unanimous in the House, except for whatever that guy is. His name is not important. I don't remember what it is. I don't care to remember his name. No, he's from Louisiana. So like it just doesn't change anything. That's my larger point. I'm getting a little worked up here because I just want to make sure that people understand that, like, this is just another roadblock, and like the voices are not going to quit. So like, what can people do is they can continue to fight, continue to do the things we've been doing. I attended the hearing last week. I think it was at this point.
It was only a week ago. We talked about you coming on. That's how wild this all feels. The original point, you guys, for this interview was he was going to give us some updates, and then this all happened. So, it's okay to be worked up because you're passionate about this. It's important. I appreciate that energy. So please tell us about last week.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about it. And last week was it's a strange word to use. I'm going to use the word, like, it was a beautiful hearing.
Sure.
Right? You don't often describe congressional hearings as beautiful, but it really was. I was there with one of my clients. She spoke at the hearing in front of the Democratic congressman. It was really emotional. I've heard her tell that story. Her name's Rose. I've heard her tell that story hundreds of times. I had read what she was going to read beforehand. I was still moved. The entire room was moved. Again, you don't often hear a thunderous applause for someone testifying at a hearing. That happened multiple times throughout hers. And all the multiple survivors spoke. And it was an amazing moment for the survivors to have their voices heard, be put in the congressional record, and hear from all the congresspersons who were there, showing their support and amplifying their voices and giving them the support. Like, that was an amazing thing. The rally we had in DC months and months ago, the press conference that was in DC, all of these little things, this thing that's going on in New York City, the Donald J. Trump, Jeffrey Epstein Memorial Reading Room. I thought it was going to be a little bit of a joke. I had no idea what it was until I was invited there. It's great. It's designed to raise the voices of the survivors. It is designed to continue to keep this in the news, keep teaching the public the breadth of not just the abuse by Epstein, but the breadth of the cover-up. And the ties to this administration. So keep doing things like that. Keep attending these hearings. Keep putting on these hearings. Keep putting on these rallies. Keep amplifying the voices. Keep believing women. And don't let money or power or intimidation or fear or political sway, prohibit you or be an obstacle for justice. It should be more of a reason to fight for justice, not an obstacle for justice. It should make you more fired up to continue to fight, not deter you from continuing to fight.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And that's why I always appreciate having you on my show to speak truth to power. And also, this work it's hard and it's a long road. I don't need to tell you, but I think it's one of those things that every step along the way, there is an opportunity for connection. There is an opportunity for education and an opportunity for enlightenment. So thank you, Eric, as always, for doing all of that for us and sharing with us these important things, because I truly believe we can build a better world if we choose to. But the first step of that is understanding where we are and speaking out against injustice and then moving the needle forward towards those goals. So thank you again. If people want to follow you or continue to receive updates around what's going on with the Epstein files, where can they go?
So best place is my Instagram. That's where I post most of my appearances and most of my advocacy about my cases. It's at Fudali, Fudali. Very simple. I was on Instagram a very long time ago, so I have a great username. It's just at my last name.
That's it.
Yeah, at Fudali. My email is Eric, ARICK, @thebloomfirm.com if you want to get in touch with me about a potential case. We don't just do Most of what we're known for is very, very high profile cases like the ones I've discussed: Eric Swalwell, Diddy, Cosby, Kanye, that type of thing. Epstein, of course. But we're a civil victims' rights advocacy. We represent victims of discrimination in the workplace, harassment, racial injustice, LGBTQ injustice, everything, gender inequality, all of that. So please stand up for yourself. Please continue to fight for those that need it most, and keep fighting the power. I appreciate you having me on, Natalie.
Always. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I saw a bunch of people tune in late, but don't worry. I'm literally going to post this on Substack in like the next 10 minutes, and then it'll be up on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple iTunes as well. So as always, everyone, until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks again, Eric. Bye.